Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and I am here for my half wrap up of April. I'm going to start with my disability readathon reads and I'm going to tell you what categories they qualify for that readathon. So this is a readathon where there are 4 categories with 4 prompts each, and the idea is that you pick one prompt from each of those categories and have a total of 4 reads to fill up your readathon TBR type thing. So from category 1, I picked the prompt something written by a deaf or hard of hearing author. And the one I got for that is El Deafo, which is a play on a word that the author heard used disparagingly on a TV program when she was a kid. And it is a graphic novel. This is from fairly close to the beginning, and everyone is drawn in it as bunnies, so it's kind of like the TV show that had Arthur on it. That was on PBS. Anyway, that one where he's an aardvark. Maybe it's Arthur the Aardvark. I don't think so. But yeah, but everybody is specifically bunnies as opposed to other type of animals. So they've got ears and are fairly stylistically drawn. Cece was actually born in like 75, so the hearing aids that they had at that time were a lot less sophisticated than they are now, and the ones that were sophisticated were really big. Hence, that is what is strapped to her chest. It's like the receiving part or the mechanical part is there, and then it sends it to her ears via wires, and she has a microphone that she can give to her teachers at school, and they talk directly into that, and that helps it go directly to her ears, and she can even understand what they're saying when she can't read their lips, because a lot of her understanding relies on reading lips, so she can only tell what they're saying if they're facing her and their mouth isn't obscured and there's more guesswork involved. So somehow, in addition to it being louder, this thing also helps with the processing of that, because it talks about, in the book she talks about how normally when like the volume of the TV is turned up, it's not actually clearer to her, it's just louder, so she still needs to lip read and like figure things out that way. So somehow this technology actually sort of clarifies what's being said, so that's really interesting. It's clear throughout the book that she struggles with internalized ableism, which is very normal for a kid, especially in a hearing family and who goes to a hearing school. She doesn't go to a deaf school. She doesn't really get involved in deaf culture, which is something she addressed in the author's note, that there are people who are deaf who are in deaf culture, and there are also people who are deaf who don't really engage with the culture and mainly live in hearing culture by using hearing products like this or and learning to lip read as opposed to learning sign language. And how some teachers were good with accommodations and making sure that they did a good job of using the microphone, and some teachers were not good and actually broke her microphone at one point. So that was really interesting as well, and it was a fairly quick read because it's nice and chunky, and there are a fair amount, quite a bit of dialogue and words, as opposed to some graphic novels have a lot less of that. Oh, and Cece deals with some of the hard things in her life by imagining she's a superhero and how her superhero alter ego would deal with issues, and that's kind of a classic form of dissociation, and it's one that I kind of use. I don't imagine myself reacting to a situation. I imagine my characters, who are not much like me, reacting to a situation if it happened in their imaginary world. So I thought that was really cool. Okay, then category 2, which is about the prompt I picked, is a book featuring invisible disability and autism, especially of the type that a person is better at masking, is an invisible disability often. So for this one I picked Journal of Best Practices, which is about a mid-30s, I think, year-old man who discovers, because his wife is a communication specialist who works with children and figures out how children need to communicate, figures it out and goes through a list of symptoms with him, and he fits a lot of the traits. I'm pretty sure he goes on and gets an official diagnosis, and it's all about him learning how to translate between his idea of how the world works and how communication works with how her idea and other people's ideas of communication works. Because he is able to mask very well at work, and put on a persona that accomplishes work tasks, so he doesn't have problems at work, but then he comes home and feels the need to unmask, which is very normal because you cannot mask 24/7. He doesn't have any energy to make up for the communication deficits between allistic and autistic, because he's used it all up at work. And so best practices is about him and his wife figuring out how to communicate with each other. And they call it empathy a lot, and people get confused a lot of the time between empathy, compassion, and understanding, which are three kind of different things, but sometimes when people say empathy, they mean compassion, and sometimes when people say empathy, they mean understanding. So it's kind of difficult. In this case, empathy was used to mean understanding, and the assumption is that if you can have empathy, you should be able to understand the other person, even if they use a totally different communication style than you, which is kind of annoying because that's not actually empathy. There are different types of empathy, like cognitive empathy, where you're able to put yourself in another person's shoes, which some autistic people are able to do, but that doesn't mean they understand everything that the other person is saying, because even if you were in the other person's shoes, that would be a stupid thing to ask for or say, or a bad way to communicate. There's also emotional empathy, where you take on the feelings that you see or hear about someone else experiencing. Some people only take it on when they see the other person experiencing an emotion. Other people, like me, experience other people's emotions even when they just hear about it. So like if I hear about somebody getting hurt, even if I don't see them crying about it, I will feel as if I have been hurt. And then there's compassion, which is being able to care about somebody hurting even though it doesn't affect you. So yeah, there are a lot of different things that make it kind of difficult to talk about this stuff, because everybody does not use precise language. But yeah, it's all about differences in communication. And also it is about him unlearning his sexism, because he was raised in a sexist household and he has a hard time telling the difference between the way things need to be for him to function because he's autistic, and the way he has been trained to have things work because he is a man and he is with a woman, and therefore this is how things should be. So it's a lot about unlearning a lot of sexism, which I really appreciate that he goes to the effort of actually doing, which a lot of men can't be bothered to. I gotta go, we'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I've been painting. I don't know how well you can see that, but it got all over my arm because I have really great spatial awareness. So yeah, in addition to talking about autism a lot, Journal of Best Practices is a lot about deconstructing the sexism inside this guy's brain. So that's really cool. And then category 3 includes just to read a prompt that is just to read a book with autistic representation, and all of these are supposed to be own voices, by the way. But so I'm gonna use another autistic book that I'm planning to read because I have a bunch of them lined up. But I'm gonna count another autistic one for category 4, which is to read a book by an Asian author. Because The Reason I Jump is actually translated. It was written in Japanese by a Japanese boy when he was about 13, and I talked about it a fair amount in my autistic booktuber tag. But basically it's a Q&A style where he answers a lot of questions about his autistic traits and how they influence how he interacts with the world, and also how he takes in the world. So it was really interesting, and he is also non-speaking. So if you want to hear more about that, I recommend this book. And also he's written another book once he was an adult that I think is also nonfiction. And then for not any particular category, I read Ugly, which is about boy, it's memoir style, who was born, I think the term is disfigured, and it goes into detail of describing in the book how exactly that is, but a lot of it was with his face and with his legs. So he had to use, I think, 2 prosthetic legs. I'm finding out this pencil is a really good talking stem. So it's good that I was using it as a marker. But maybe I should get myself a stim toy, or pick out a stim toy from my collection of objects to use while I'm filming, because I'm enjoying this. But it's mostly about from when he was born to, I think, high school, maybe just middle school, but it's all about just living as a disfigured person and as a person who uses prosthetics. But yeah, he had various surgeries done on his face because he kind of didn't have a nose at first. They kind of built him a nose and did a fair amount of plastic surgery, and this was at least a decade ago, so they weren't quite as good at plastic surgery back then as they are now. And so it was also about just his life and how, there's a really upsetting part at the beginning about how his family, specifically his parents, weren't sure about whether to take him home or whether to put him in an institution. So that was really upsetting to me, but the author is actually the one who narrated it, and then it was an audiobook, and both the words he was saying and the tone he used were super not emotional when he was talking about it, so I assume he's made his peace with that. But yeah, it made me emotional. But yeah, after that, his parents, once they decided to keep him, they were very defensive of him, and grew quite a bit, I think, through his childhood to deal with their ableism and learn how to not think of him as lesser, and eventually started involving him in his decisions, his care decision, his surgical decisions. For a while they just made those decisions for him. But yeah, it was about going to school and having friends, and how he could swim quite a bit better than he could walk or run, so he got really interested in swimming competitively. How he did a handstand and walked on his hands for a talent show once because it was extra easy for him because his center of gravity was more towards his upper body because he had not much legs. So yeah, there were sad parts and happy parts and a lot of emotional parts, and it was really interesting. I'm going to link below a bunch of disabled TikTok creators for the rest of this month and whenever such things come up, because I found some really great educators on there, and some of them have other platforms, so you can find them on other platforms if you prefer. But I really like their educational content, and they're just, you know, daily life content. So some of them will be autistic, some of them will be various other disabilities. My favorite is Crutches and Spice, I believe is her handle. She is super, like, brilliant and always has really good commentary on current events, and she is like really educated on theory and the history of disabled rights, and is just a general badass. I really like her. Yes, so that is most of my disabled reads. Some of these are from the end of March because I, for some reason, forgot that there was one more week of March when I did my March wrap up. So one of those is Dear Ijewele, a Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions, which is a letter written by, I'm pretty sure she was Nigerian. I'm not sure if she still lived in Nigeria when she wrote it, or if she had emigrated somewhere else. So it is her writing to her friend who's having a baby, and her friend knows that she is a feminist thinker slash advocate, and so she has asked for advice on how to raise her daughter as a feminist. And so there's a lot of the basic tenets of feminism, but they are, a lot of them, particularly aimed at a way that you can raise a child with this stuff, like teaching them that different sexualities exist and that hobbies are not gendered, and not limiting what toys you give them based on their gender, teaching them to value themselves, and teaching them that sexism and racism exist, and that the messages that they get from the world about their value are not to be believed, and stuff like that. And I really liked it. I listened to the audiobook of that one too. Then another nonfiction, which I guess almost all the ones I've talked about this time are nonfiction. I don't read that much nonfiction most of the time, but I guess a fair number of these are memoirs. Killers of the Flower Moon is one that I talked about like a month ago or so, that is about how one of the first big cases that the FBI solved back when it was being founded by Hoover was figuring out who was killing lots and lots of members of the Osage tribe. The reason they were being targeted overall was mostly because of money, because they were rich, and because this isn't stated in the book, but you can easily extrapolate that they're mostly white killers didn't believe that they deserved that money, and whereas they targeted them as opposed to other people, partially because they are less protected by the law, and they knew it was safer to kill them, but also because they didn't have as much ire towards white rich people, which is something you can still see today. Rich white people have done a good job of making poor white people think that BIPOC people are the reasons that the white people are poor, as opposed to the rich people who are sucking our blood. Anyway, so it follows that case. It starts out following some disappearances and some bodies being found, and then it eventually follows the people who are investigating the case. And it was really interesting. If you don't want to know, and I read the for kids or the for juniors, juvenile version, but there was still a medium amount of gore in it, so I don't know if they like shortened it or simplified the language or what they did to it. If you don't want to know who done it, if you want to read it as a mystery, which from what I've read of reviews, a lot of people like to read it that way, don't listen to the foreword, at least on that version, because it, while it didn't name the people, it very much made it easy to guess. The problem for me, why I can't really enjoy a real life true crime type stuff, is because it's real, I can't just pretend it didn't happen or put it out of my mind like I can with like the murders in my J.D. Robb series. Knowing that it really happened makes their pain real for me, and some autistic people who have specific subtypes of empathy can listen to true crime but can't watch people cry in person or be sad or at all in person, whereas I have the multiple types that mean that if I, like I said earlier, if I hear about somebody being in pain, it hurts me. So this was quite a stressful and upsetting read, so I had it go fairly fast because this was on audiobook too. It was really interesting, but it was also really, really sad, and I think it says at the beginning that some of the murders were caught, but there were way too many murders for just those people to have done, and there were more murders that profited other people as opposed to just these people, so it's very likely that similar circumstances repeated themselves over and over. So that was kind of sad too, but seeing justice come to the few murderers that they did catch was very satisfying. Another memoir, Fatty Legs. This is about a woman who was an Inuit, which it says in the book actually that even though Inuit is a specific name for a specific tribe of people who live, of indigenous people from the far north of America, far north of North America. The country is mostly Canada, but also Alaska. It is also okay to use it as a generic term. And there was a lot of like little asides and stuff like that. I think that was in like the afterword or something, and so that was very useful and helpful. I appreciated that. Who went to a boarding school. Boarding schools were pretty terrible, and most of them were compulsory, whereas this particular one that this woman went to as a child was mostly teaching kids who were like really far flung, and so people didn't go and kidnap them. They just encourage them to come and learn because they would teach them to read at this school. And some kids would only go for a couple of years, and some kids would go for more, but it is all about how she wanted to go learn to read and was treated very badly there. Not as bad as a lot of children in that she made it out both alive and without being essayed. It was still quite bad, and partially because there were a few nuns in power who were a lot less bad than others, she was actually able to stand up for herself, keep the one nun who was treating her particularly badly from being able to have that much power over her life. Another nonfiction, Big Friendship. I found this in the women's history section, I think, of my library's digital, and it's all about friendship between two women and how it's kind of like a queer platonic relationship, but they don't live together. It's where it's much bigger deal than the amount of care that people in our society usually put into platonic friendships, and they depend on each other a lot more. So that's why it's called a big friendship. That's the word they came up with to describe how it's different from a lot of platonic relationships. One of them is black and one of them is white. And so part of it is how they dealt with when racism would come up, how that caused problems because the white woman didn't always recognize it and sometimes perpetuated it. And also how their jobs and their other relationships would affect their relationship, and how they grew apart and then decided that they cared enough to work on growing back together, and how they had to learn to open up to each other, and how to recognize that they were more different than they originally thought. Even though they had a lot of similarities, they need to recognize that they were also different, and to value those differences instead of just pushing them aside. And I really liked it. I really like women's friendships and platonic relationships in general. I'm a big fan. And this is a mix between a double memoir and a how to maintain a big friendship. Then this should be the last nonfiction, And We Rise, and this is by Erica Martin, and it is a bunch of poetry about the 1950s through 60s civil rights movement. And so it highlights a bunch of the different people who were involved. Big names that most people are familiar with, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., but also lesser known people like Rosa Parks' predecessor. She had a lot of predecessors because getting rights for black people to ride on buses and trains and public transportation in general was a long drawn out battle, but one particular woman was like 9 months before Rosa Parks, and she didn't get as much press or sympathy or was pushed forward by the movement because she was a teenaged, unwed, pregnant woman. They were probably right that it would give people an excuse not to get behind their movement, but also there was some sexism and purity culture involved in that decision. Also, there's some about how the Black Panthers took care of people, and there's some on the Montgomery, I think, bus boycott and how long it was. And so during that time, everybody had to walk, I assume, or bicycle to work and everywhere they wanted to go, and how that was a lot. Some of it's very emotional. I know a fair number of the stories, but not all of them. Okay, now 2 romances. Didn't Mean to Love You by Christina C. Jones. This is the second in the series. Anyway, I read another of these last month, and this is set in the same little area of black-owned businesses. That has a coffee shop and a chocolate shop and a haircut place and a tattoo place and a flower place, and all the shop owners know each other, so they have this cute little group. And this time it is about the chocolate shop owner and the barbershop owner, and it's very cute. Much like the previous one in this series, it was not as formulaic as I'm used to romances being. There is a lot of different the beats weren't all, you know, in the same order and with the same amount of time between them. There was some handling of bad parents involved, and the characters working through that I enjoyed. And it's fairly short, only 200 pages. Serendipitous Love, that's the name of the series. And it was kind of nice to just have a romance that is a bit different, and I can't predict what's going to happen next. The other one was The Hookup Plan, which is the third in a series that I started last month. It's not out yet. It is, I got a NetGalley arc of it, and I really liked it. I think I read it in 2 days. But I really enjoyed the first book in that series, and I enjoyed the second one a fair amount, and I really liked this character who had been set up through both of those books. So I was really excited for this one, and it met expectations. It was really nice. It is about a pediatric surgeon and a former hedge fund manager who now runs a company that helps hospitals figure out their finances, and her hospital needs to figure them out. So they work together on a certain level for a while, and he was also her biggest rival back in high school. She competed against him to get the best grades and was co-valedictorian with him, and they run into each other first before they start working together at their 15-year high school reunion. And I really liked the parental issues that were addressed in this one, and I really liked how they ended up being handled. And this book also handles grief because one of the main characters' mother has died. But yeah, a lot of what I enjoyed was just the characters and the relationship between them. Then we have some middle grade fantasy, my favorite. So Dragons in a Bag I found in my library's audiobook catalog, and it is about a young boy who goes to stay with someone while his mom goes to court to see if she can get an extension to not be evicted. And while he's with this person, she needs to deliver some dragons. I guess I was thinking if it was a spoiler, but it's in the title. So she needs to deliver some tiny dragons, and he tries to help her with that. It's a really cool magic system. It's like urban fantasy maybe, where most people don't know exists, but it's just going on in the background or the underground of regular old New York City. And there's like talking pigeons and rabbits and invisible people who wear a ton of layers of clothes so that their body has a form, and cool stuff like that. And there's like interdimensional portals. It was quite a lot of fun. I really like the grumpy old lady that he's assisting. That's a fun archetype, especially when she's a super competent old lady who has magic powers, and he's the little apprentice who just helps out in his little bumbling way. And then I also read the sequel, which kind of takes off before the first one has like totally, you don't feel like it's totally wrapped up, and it's called The Dragon Thief, which adds a perspective. So now it's the first kid's perspective as well as another kid. This is still involving taking care of baby dragons. We get more of that world building, but also now our grumpy old lady is incommunicado, so our kid characters have to take care of things themselves. And it was just really cute and enjoyable, and I'm gonna read the third book sometime soon. I also read Grounded, The Adventures of Rapunzel, which is a fairy tale retelling that is set in a world with a bunch of different fairy tales going on. So like we have this little guy is Jack, as in Jack and the Beanstalk, and girls being rescued from towers is a normal thing that happens all the time. There's this cool magic system that involves little acorns that you crack and they turn into food, or they turn into a dog sled, or they turn into a rope. They're expensive, so that's why the whole world isn't totally run on them. There's also witch magic, which is separate from fairy magic, and the various fairy tales that the author chose are sort of woven together so that they all work within the same world. And like interact with each other, and I always enjoy that. And our main character has been locked in a tower her whole life. She is like super doesn't know anything about the world, and doesn't know like who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. When someone climbs her tower, she calls the witch on them and ends up leaving her tower to try to protect the witch from the people she believes are trying to hurt the witch. And then that leads her to going on this quest, and they have a companion who's a frog. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. Okay, that is all I've got for you. I'm thinking this next week of doing a reading vlog of several disability reads as well as some others. And how about you tell me the last nonfiction book that you read, since I've been reading so much of that this month, very abnormally for me. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!